I first wanted to start off by saying that I probably come from a very different world than a lot of you, unless it's not men are from Mars and women are from Venus. This is a different world. I come from, my childhood was an orphanage world. I was born, I came to consciousness, if you like, I was about 4 years old. I was already in an orphanage in Shropshire. Before that time, I'd spent 3 months in Rosemundy, and then I spent about 6 months in Instow in North Devon. I don't know if you know, but the stately home of Lord Hector Christie's, the Hector Christie family. There was a home there for handicapped children. And, you know, sometimes I think that when they said any physical defects or maladies half-cast, that's why I ended up in that particular home for 6 months. So we know the times, the difficult times, both for race and for women. It's hugely oppressive times for any minorities really in society. But for us in care, I was brought up in a different world. I was brought up in a children's world. It was a children's world. For us, the staff were like the crocodiles who patrol the edges of our world, and we knew that if we crossed them, they'd snap back at us. But we were like, first of all, the first home I really remember was in Southport. That was 40 kids, and the second home was when I was 6 years old, moved to where there was 20 kids. But we were like a family of siblings. We weren't. I wouldn't say in those days there was a relative level of stability in these children's homes, and there were benefits and threats. And I think often people can concentrate too much on some of the threats and the dangers and forget what the positives were. A friend of mine who brought up in a home of an engineer, a very relatively happy home. He was one lad and 4 sisters, and relatively well off. He got halfway through the gully in the cupboard, and he said, "You had a better childhood than I did." And that's because I could describe the types of things we did together as children, how we learned from each other. We protected each other. We were gangs. Yes, we were marched to school. Yes, we had these. Yes, we had punishment and so forth, as many people did at the time. Yes, we faced physical abuse, as you put it today, but as many people did at the time. But when I woke up in the morning to when I went to sleep at night, I was in a children's world. And I was learning from those children and learning from my peers. At school, it's true, we learn from teachers, but fundamentally, from my experience, children learn from other children. And that is the value, and a terrible thing that's happening today of children being isolated and separated from each other, instead of focusing on the value they can give to each other, learning what humanity really is. There was abuse. There was abuse by staff. There was very little abuse by the kids, actually, because we had relative stability. There was abuse by female staff, and later on there would be serious, much more sharp, horrific, brutal abuse from the male superintendent. But within that, that corroded our world, but at the same time, within that we had a world which protected ourselves. And ultimately, as you read in the Gully in the Cupboard, when we children finally decided, I left by this time, but finally decided to stand up to the abuser, collectively, the children, a group of siblings, 5, 6 siblings from Liverpool, they refused to get off a bus until the police were called. They just sat there and refused to get off the bus. A bit like Selma Parks and co. in Rosa Parks, in Selma, in the civil rights battle. They refused to get off that bus, and as a result, the abuser was thrown out of the home. The police were called, and Bernardo sacked that guy. Repeatedly, we tried to get that man moved. I'd written. And then I've been written to the regional office, and then I've been made to retract that letter. I was, 15 years old. The kids had asked me to write it. I didn't know exactly what I was writing, but I was writing it for them. I was sent away, other kids were sent away, and so forth. But finally, when groups of children stood together, and when children stand together, they can be very, very powerful. And that's one of the reasons why we, in belief, why we were so intimidated and threatened and called liars and so forth to other people, and our image created as a bad image because they wanted to keep us down, to keep us separated, to keep us intimidated. And that's just like the school system was, if you remember, in the 50s and 60s, how violent it was towards many children, to keep them intimidated, to keep them, because a group of kids, we know, they can outwit an adult very easily, and when a group of teenagers, they can outfight an adult as well. So there's this balance in society about how we look after children and how we value children. For me, that's very important. For me, children are our future, and they are beautiful in so many ways, and it's for us to protect and develop them. And so, my feelings are there because I come from that world. I didn't have any particular adults who I didn't know my mother and father. I didn't know any relatives or something. I was just a kid in this orphan world, going through it, trying to make my way through it. I didn't trust adults, as you can understand why. We didn't have a particular relationship with adults. If they told me I wasn't this or I couldn't do that, then it didn't really worry me too much because I didn't really believe it. I never felt I had love. I didn't know really what it was, but then I'd never had it taken away from me. I never had that. So I had a relative level of freedom, if you like, and able to think out and try and work out things for myself. So I am thankful for those experiences in many ways, which are quite unique, quite unique and valuable as far as I'm concerned. And it's how we match it. You know, when I was 15, I found this out later, someone in the home wrote, one of the staff wrote, is a lad in their report, is a lad in need of a hard task because he delights in achieving the impossible. How do you like that? Have you ever achieved the impossible? Yeah, I can't remember when I did it, but it's a double-sided thing that about what they actually thought was possible. Could I go to university? Could I do this? Could I do that? Whatever they said, anyway, it seemed like I did something which they couldn't. So we learned from each other, and that was one of the benefits. One of the negatives as well, apart from abuse, was neglect of our education. Because we were seen as going nowhere. Because we were nobodies. And one of the problems with young people in care today, as ever, is they have no constituency. There's no member of parliament who can really stand up and say, these are my kids. Yeah? There's no one prepared to, if you say there's going to be a children's home in this area, normally the MP goes to the Minister of Education and says, move them on. We don't want them here. If you say you're going to get a new school in the area, say, yes, we want a new school. But when it comes to kids in care, there's no one who's particularly going to vote for them, partly because of the nature of our society. Our education was neglected. We weren't considered to go very far. In fact, this little story, when I was 10 years old, I think this is in Golly in the Cupboard, we had to do the 11 plus in those days. You remember the 11 plus? And I was 10. And they gave us a form. The teacher gave a form in the class and they said, right, you're going to do the 11 plus. If you pass it, you've got to put King George V Grammar School, which was the grammar school of the town. If you don't pass it, put your favourite secondary modern school. So take this home for your parents and so forth. Well, of course, I didn't take it home. I just filled it in. And I filled it in. If I pass my 11 plus, I want to go to Birkdale Secondary Modern School. And if I don't pass my 11 plus, I want to go to Birkdale Secondary Modern School. Why didn't I want to go to grammar school? Because they played rugby. I wanted to play football. I was football. So this is what I did. But being very naive and rather stupid, which still may be, I just, when it came to the 11 plus, I know that. It's a tick, 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 blah, blah, blah. Yeah? And then a month later, the headmaster, Mr. Johns, got me into his study and he said, Phil Frampton, you've been a very naughty boy. I said, what do you mean? Very silly boy, he said. And then he said, what are you doing this for? You must change it now. You can't the table like that. And I changed it and I went out crying and I ended up going to university. Going to the grammar school and on to university. Was he right or was he wrong? Was he right or was he wrong? Difficult one, isn't it? He was wrong because he was bullying me. Yeah? If he'd explained it, he probably would have changed me on. But there again, maybe not. So, and anyway, he was wrong because I could be now chairman of the Liverpool Football Club. Don't So the point there was, if I was in control of my own destiny as far as education was concerned, because they didn't really care about our education. Because once I was at the past my 11 plus and at the grammar school, then I was like a star boy, and then it was a different type of thing. And things went different. At the grammar school, well, they didn't play football, but the first rugby game I played in, apparently, according to my friend, I ran in 6 tries. So then I liked rugby, so it wasn't too bad after all. I went through that school, and that left me isolated partly from the other kids in the home. And that was one of the dangers for me. But I made some good friends in school. But there was the other issues, and that was at 13, 14, I had a fight for top dog fight in terms of fighting in the school. Why? Well, how did he? You'll have to excuse my language, but this is the language we faced. This guy, young guy, he said to me, sort of really hard. He said, "So, you're a nigger." Yeah. When someone says nigger, you have to fight. Yeah. The only real trauma, when I tell people I was brought up in care, they think, oh, how bad, how sad. The trauma I faced growing up in a white town was racism. It was racism. That's the only real thing which got to me was the racism. I've got on YouTube, you can look it up, a track called Our Town Now, and you can find it on via Google, and it's like a rap, which I did last year or two, about speaking at an event in Southport. It was a Black History Month event about growing up in the town. And I thought, well, how can I say it differently? Because I've spoken the previous year. And it went, the N-word. First it began with a W, an S or a D, or it started with the N or a B or a C. But it all meant the same to my black friends and me, it was the N-word. We used to scurry around the town, black children on our own, trying to stand our ground but feeling so alone. Take the bruised black eye but never, never cry. Punch them in the mouth to stop that word come out. Take a detour down round that street, it's where the bullies meet. Take your fist on a bus in case you make a fuss at sitting next to you because your skin ain't true. The N-word. It was said to make us cry, but we stand our ground and fight at the N-word. 50 years on and the word hasn't gone, but it's our town now. And so forth and so on. And that summed up that part of my feelings about what it was like to grow up at that time. Things have changed, things have moved on a lot, fortunately, in that regard. But of course, racism was part of the reason why I ended up at Rosemundy in the first place. As you saw from as I think you would have gleaned from the video, that was one of the biggest reasons. And because my father was kicked out of the country by the government for having an affair with my mother. And that's why I met her. And why she ended up, principally why she ended up at Rosemundy, travelling 125, 200 miles from Birmingham down to here to have me in secret, as so many children were born there in secret. People came from London, and high-class people came, all sorts of people from all sorts of different backgrounds were ended up at Rosemundy. So the treatment of married mothers in some ways was a leveller as far as society was concerned. So at 15 I was out of the home. I was out of the home partly because of the abusive nature in the home, but also because I felt like I was now 15, you could leave home then, and you could leave school and go to work. So I wanted to leave home. I didn't want to leave school because I began to understand that education was my way out. And it was a grammar school, of course, and there were pictures of people who'd gone to Cambridge and done this and do that. So I thought, well, if I could do that, maybe I could get a bit of money and get a way out of this town and get to do what I want to do with my life, whatever it would be. And so I focused on that. At 16, though, I was in an abusive placement first of all, a foster placement, and middle class abusive foster placement. Then luckily at 16 I ended up out of that, and I was in a bed sit, living on my own, still at school, I think some of my school friends actually were jealous of me because I didn't have any parents on my back. But it was a pretty grotty, horrible place, effectively like a hostel for single guys. But it was my freedom. It was my elbow. It was my freedom. It was my everything. And from there, I sat my Oxford exams and failed. So I ended up going to Bristol University and really quite enjoyed my time there. But you know, I was proud of the fact that I was from an orphanage. I was proud of that fact that I was from an orphanage. Even by that time, I didn't know about Rosemundy, by the way. I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know much about my story at all. And it's not confession, no. I didn't know much about my story at all. And that had an effect, that had an impact. You know, Rosemundy, there's so many secrets of Rosemundy. You'll hear some maybe tonight about how people didn't know what their story was. I had, from the time I got to, I was in a hall, my flatmates became my housemates, and we spent 3-4 years together. And we used to go on trips together, we used to go like with friends' cottages together and things like that. We used to go climbing, we went all over the southwest, we never got to St Agnes, we went down to other places. And I felt we were okay. Maybe when we smoked marijuana together, I wasn't that happy for some reason. I thought maybe it was paranoia. And then, when The Gully and the Cupboard came out, one of these friends, who was a deputy head of a major public health authority, because they were all brilliant, all these kids were all brilliant, all went on to be professors and blah, 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 and really fantastic jobs. And he said to me, he rang, and then asked him to put it in writing. He said, "I'm sorry, Phil, but we didn't believe you. They didn't believe that I was in an orphanage. They thought I was a compulsive liar because I could speak like them. Yeah? And I never knew what was going on. I never knew this. I didn't know, and this is where probably the marijuana sensitivity came in. I didn't know what behind the scenes they thought, actually, not just lying about that, then they thought I was lying about other things as well, about my childhood. So when we went climbing in Ramley, up in the Lake District, I said, when I was at school, I climbed that, Peggy Ark. It's a long way from here, so you probably won't know it, but you'll know it. And I said we walked up James Strait, and he said, he's from the south, you know, like here, Little Hills, and he said, I looked at it, so Steve, you could have done that. That was just another one of Phil's porkies. That's what he said. And you know, and isn't it fantastic? Now, if I'd been robbing them, then they probably would have thought, oh yeah, he said, so that's because he was in care. But because I didn't fit their world view of what care was, then somehow I was the one who was crazy. I was the one who was like psychopathic, liar. Yeah? Isn't that strange? That's the way how the worlds can work like that. And this was like with the women from the mothers of Rosemundy. That because they didn't fit in with how things should be, they became the ones who were pathologized, incredibly pathologized. You know, and especially after the 50s, because when maternal benefits came in and so forth, when women could claim for their children, and suddenly they became, if they were single mothers, they became wasters on the system. They became a threat to the system. A lot of historians say that prior to the Second World War, actually women were mainly seen, if they were single, they were often seen as victims of the men. Now suddenly they became the perpetrators of their own condition. And this was a horrible turnaround. It wasn't progress, it was actually things going backwards from that point of view. But there was if you like, ultimately a sad financial reason for it, in my view. So we have something which is called careism, which is prejudice against prejudices, because a lot of people who study the care system, they do it from the point of view of a family. They do it from the point of view of being parented. It is very difficult for someone who's not being parented to fully understand being parented. I never wanted to be parented, by the way. I just wanted to be free. Yeah, I wanted money. I wanted nice things, but I didn't particularly want to be parented. But someone who's being parented, it's very difficult to understand the benefits of not being parented, if you see what I mean. Because you're always looking at how would it be if you hadn't been with your parents. Psychologically, that's not very understandable. But it does mean that when people analyse things like care, there often is a prejudice which goes in there, which is difficult for them to cope with. Instead of seeing it should be positive. It should be a positive view when the state actually gets hold of kids and parenting. What can we do with them? Not how can we get them off our hands as quickly as possible? And that sadly is a lot of the situation at the moment. So what happened to me then? So I went to university. It was the 1970s. It was a revolutionary era. Do you know what I mean? Revolutionary era. There was the Greek Revolution. There was Nicaragua. There was the uprisings in Angola, Mozambique, and so forth. There was the Portuguese Revolution. I went and visited the Portuguese Revolution in 1974. It was beautiful. The people were fun, and they were on the streets. They were lovely. I went 5 years ago, and they were very, very glum because they felt like they were being pushed out of Lisbon by the tourism industry and so forth. But then I went there. Why? Because I wanted to make a difference in the world. I went to university. I wanted to make a difference. I was looking for a socialist revolutionary party, and I couldn't find one. So what did I do? I said I'd help gypsies. So I set up Bristol Gypsy Support Group. Who knows why? But I did anyway. And we won them a site within 2 years. We actually won their first site in Bristol. So I was quite proud of that. But then I quite think back and said, what? I think it was just like I got drawn in because I was a bit naive, you know. I read too many Ian Blyton books. But it was just to say I wanted to do something. And then I found that, you know, it was almost like when you do this and then things go backwards, you do this. So ultimately you need the greatest change of all, and that's socialist movement and socialist revolution. And that's where I went for 20 years with the socialist revolutionary movement. In 1974, I joined the militant Trotskyist group you might have heard of in the Labour Party. By 1978 I was national chair of the Labour Party Young Socialists, the Labour Party's youth movement, which was overwhelmingly a Trotskyist revolutionary youth movement at the time. In 1993, we know what happened in the Soviet Union, the collapse of the Soviet Union. The world took a different turn, it went backwards. The revolutionary movement was confused, split, and divided. I decided I had more things to do. By then I had a wife and 2 children, and it was like I've got to feed them. So I went. What did I do? I went into journalism freelance, and I went into market research. Why did I go into market research? Because you didn't need a CV to go into market research. The CV saying I'm a revolutionary, I'm a troublemaker, it doesn't really work, did it? So I was condemned to freelance, and I was happy being freelance. And I wrote 3 travel guides. I'm involved in all sorts of things. I'd written by then, one of them was very popular on Kerala in the southwest of India. It was the first travel guide on that area, so I was treated like a god and so forth. And then I wrote on Kerala for the Independent on Sunday. I did an article on Ayurvedic tourism. But ultimately, basically, I had a picture of me covered in rice pudding, with my backside covered in rice pudding, on the front page of the Independent on Sunday travel section. That made me a broad journalist. So 1997 comes up, and suddenly on the TV, I saw this program about files access, about kids in care being able to access their files. And I wanted to know my story. You know, one of the reasons why I think my university friends didn't believe me, because I couldn't really tell them my story. If you don't know then you can't be convincing. And that's the one thing about not knowing your story. As some of the Rosemundy babies will say here today, that silence in there, that gap in there. So I've now had a chance to fill in and find my story. So I applied to Bernardo's. Bernardo's, who were the principal carers for me all through that time. Bernardo said, sorry, 3.5 years, you've got to wait. And so I pressed it, I had solicitors and MP involved, and then they said, finally replied, said, we only give out these early access to the records if you are in your 80s or 90s, for people in their 80s or 90s, or in at high risk of death. So then I went and had a pulmonary embolism, and a pulmonary embolism was with pleurisy as well, and 5 blood clots on one lung and 4 blood clots on one lung. Very clever move. And so I came out of there with a certificate from the report from the consultants which said at high risk of death. But I didn't die, as you see. And so I said, oh great, I've got this now, I can go to Bernardo. So I presented it to Bernardo. Oh yes, all right, we'll give you a file. But I was so angry by the file then, I thought, well, I'll take this to, and I put to the Guardian, I won a commission to do a 2-piece. So when I had to go all the way up to Kendal, so that's for you down here, about 120 miles to access my files. And they said if I didn't read these 733 pages, which included my school report, within that day, I'd have to go back again. So I went up there, read them, then they gave me a plastic bag, stuffed my life in the plastic bag, and said, take it home with you. That's how they treated us. But all that went in the Guardian, and it was a feature, centre-page feature over two weeks in the Society magazine, and it got a big response. And one of the respondents was the other people from care activists. I wasn't a care activist at the time. The people who've been most in the care system, the care leaver activists, if you like. So they said, oh, will you help us, and blah, blah. So I set up with them the Care Leavers Association, and in 2000, 2000 we set it up, and then that inspired the Care Leavers Association in Australia, Clan. Clan did some fantastic victories and won lots of compensation and led the abuse issues there, so I'm very proud of that. We didn't get so far here, but the CLA is still a national charity here. So that's what came out of this as well, my search for my records. Then the other thing which came out was these agents and TV people coming and saying, you know, will you tell your story and so forth. So one of them was a guy, a very good agent, and he said, well, if you want to write books, I said, okay, I'll write a book. Yeah. Why did I write it? Well, to get my view over, but also for money, obviously. What did we, you know, someone said to me, was it, well, when it came out, a Guardian journalist said, was it therapeutic writing the book? I said, no. Because I was already a campaign on these issues anyway. I said, no, it wasn't therapeutic. It was like creating a piece of furniture. It was like, just like you would write a report, you know, it was like putting it together. It's not, for me, it was a job to do. It was a campaign. It was about changing things. And I just want to emphasise that the Guardian of the Company is not simply a you know, personal reflection. It also has a viewpoint about care in it. I wrote it principally to validate our childhood in care, to say this is what it was. And we had a valid childhood. And not good in some ways and bad in other ways. But everyone has that in their childhood in different ways. And that's what needs to be accepted. But also to point out that children are heroes. And it's often the adults who will let them down. Sadly, instead of attacking these children, we should be giving them more support. So that's what came out of it as well. And out of that as well, then there was a radio program, a radio documentary called The Gully in the Cupboard, which was done by the Radio Merseyside, BBC Radio Merseyside. When I first approached BBC about doing something about the book, they said, oh no, because of the title, you can't do it. Yeah? So that was that. And then, however, there was a woman who actually came from the hometown, who was a producer in Radio Merseyside. She was really interested. Her name's Caroline Adams. She's if you're from Exeter, you might know her from Radio Devon now. She was at Radio Merseyside then. She said she won a commission to do a programme, so we did a programme together. We got in the cupboard, and it won a Race in the Media award. Despite the time, despite the time it won the national from the Commission for Racial Equality. So this was a big surprise, a big accolade. So then the BBC were proud of the and put it on several times. And so then I did a few other documentaries, some of them like Bring Back Orphanages, which was about that role of the importance of orphanages, given the reason abuse took place is bad management. It's nothing to do with the actual building itself, it's bad management in those situations which create those problems. And we see the same with Rosemundy as well. A lot of the issues were simply about bad management, not about the women, but about the management of those places. So, and that leads me on, because in that time, I continued to campaign, especially on the issue of orphanages. And then I approached Caroline again and said, look, you're in Devon now, why don't we do a programme on the circumstances of my birth? And let's look at the position of married mothers in the 50s and 60s, and let's look at the position of racism, because those were ultimately the two factors which impacted on my birth. And one thing which I've not mentioned is that when the Cornish Moral Welfare Society said they were trying to find me adopted parents and so forth, they said in their reports there are no parents in the South where no couples who are prepared to take in a half-caste, mixed-race Igbo child. That's what they said, basically. No chance in the Southwest. We know that's very different today, but that's how it was at the time. So we set about researching this programme, and I did one of the things for the research. I set up the Rosemundy Home on Married Mothers page on Facebook. If you're on Facebook, you can have a look at it. There's about 300 people now on that Facebook. Many of them looking for people, looking for relatives and so forth, and trying to stitch things together and find out, looking for adopted records and issues like that is very, very difficult. And I was shocked at what I found, shocked and saddened. But it also was important to me, because you know what? When I wrote The God in the Cupboard, I didn't really know all this about Rosemundy that I discovered. I didn't discover the way in which the women would march single file to church through the village, crocodile style through the village, how they faced abuse as they went through the village, how they went to the church of Father Barnabas and were effectively abused in the church. They would enter the church last. They would face people again being abusive to them in the church. They would be told that they'd have to meet him every day, told to repent and so forth. They were forced to scrub, even when they were heavily pregnant, forced to scrub, get down on their hands and knees and scrub the floors for hours on end to deal with those old hot. They had to do all the laundry with all the hot irons, huge, heavy work, real heavy work. In those copper pots and so forth, in really hot, in terrible heat and so forth. They were forced to do those things. And they were, for many ways, the worst thing was hearing the stories about their babies being taken away. First of all, their babies would they would have the baby fairs, where they were like garden fetes, where their babies would be stuck in plant and people would go and they would be locked up while people went and looked at and cherry picked their babies. Secondly, when the babies were chosen by the adoptees, then the mothers would have to prepare them for being taken away, and then once prepared, they would be handed over to the staff, and the mothers would be locked up in a room above the front of the house, so they could watch, if they wanted, their babies. Their babies being taken away.
Yeah, it's dreadful.
For me, it was just inhuman. And, you know, for many for many, many reasons. It's just like what type of society were we, and how luckily we managed to move on to some extent from that. So I then began to really understand a bit more about what my mother had been through in order to have her lover's child. And then to find her lover then saying, I don't, I'm sorry, I'm getting married to someone else. Yeah? They began to understand, and I wanted to, so that helped me to understand her. Not juries will still be out, but it just gives a better balance. And that's why, one reason why I brought out Golly, the third edition, the revised third edition, and added more information about that, because when everyone sees a book, reads a book through the prism of their own experience and understanding, but principally their experience. And many people, they were very, I was surprised how critical they were of my mother. And so I thought I couldn't quite get to that. But as much as I could criticise her, I couldn't quite get to see how they thought she was such a terrible woman. But I left it open in the book to a certain extent for people to judge. And I think for me, having this little bit of understanding, I wouldn't defend her, but I could understand her weakness, and having had to face all this, and then to go out and face society with a baby on your own as well. And when you felt that society was so much against you, she was broken basically in many ways. She was broken. That's my particular feeling. But I think it's to get a balance of understanding with all those bits of knowledge. Without those bits of knowledge, it's very difficult to put the pictures together. So I was thankful for that. And also I wanted to say to other people, this is what's happened. Now, and there were some fantastic people I met through that programme. And if you listen to Crime Shame, and in particular, the phone-in programme, which is not, we didn't cherry pick those people. The feelings and the emotion and the anger in there, and the willingness to get the message out really shook me. They said that programme could have lasted for 2 hours and more, but they had to shut it down after an hour because so many people rang up at the time. Because it happened not just at Rosemundy, it happened all over the country. And the more research I did, the more I understood, and I met a group of people, a movement for an adoption apology. And I'm not, I don't want to do a programme and just like, I watch programmes about care very occasionally, because for me, often the TV, sadly to say this for journalists, I have this experience of them, it's for entertainment. They want to put things in your mouth and make you say these things and so forth. And then they walk away from it. And I like the journalists who are campaigning journalists who then say, no, I'm going to stick with this and do something with it. And there was one guy from the BBC who did this with the movement for an adoption apology. I can't remember his name at the moment. But anyway, I worked with that campaign, organised 2 lobbies of Parliament in 1912, 1913 period. We got groups of people together who boosted the campaign. And in 2021, finally we got a parliamentary inquiry. I don't know if anyone was aware of this, but there was a parliament. It was on the news quite a bit. The parliamentary inquiry, and that exposed what had happened all over the country. It wasn't just in the homes for married mothers. It was in the hospitals where women were refused anaesthetic often for having their baby. That will teach you never to do it again. It wasn't just there. It was on the streets, yes. But the government, they funded a lot of these homes because they were funding the Church of England, who ran 80 of these homes. So the government was involved in all this. They were involved in the social work mess as well in terms of attitudes to unmarried mothers. And so you had the government handling it, you had the hospitals doing this, you had often, if you were around at the time, how much even in the streets unmarried mothers might face abuse and so forth, for nothing, for no crime whatsoever. So we took up this campaign, and the parliamentary inquiry was a victory. In 2022, the government said refused to give an apology on behalf of the government, but they apologised for what happened in the hospitals. They have apologised for what happened in society. And And I think, you know, I'd say to Roger, I think this St Agnes town should put up a plaque to the mothers and children of Rosemundy. I think they should put up a plaque. Why? Because for them, to show them that they weren't, you know, whatever happened in this town, there is an understanding and a forgiveness now and acceptance that we move forward, we accept what happened and we move on. There's a plaque for one of the matrons in Rosemundy in the hotel, but where's the plaque for the survivors of the system? And that a real, if there's an apology from society, what better way to concretize it apart from the support? You know, this, I'll just say, this, people say, oh, we move on, let's move on. But you know how many people are still suffering from the unmarried mother syndrome, the ones who don't know, who can't say who their mother was, who can't say really what happened to them. This goes on through generations. It's not just one little incident there, it goes on to the next one. My mother was this, my mother, and it goes through there. So it's not something which simply goes away. It's about an apology, a proper apology, a proper sense of we'll move on by saying this is how we respect the fact we're sorry for what happened, and let's go on together in unity, because we're now, whatever, we're all part of the same society, and people should be brought back together as one. So that is my main feeling about Rosemundy. So, and where I come from. So Rosemundy helped me in some ways to understand more about my mother, and I'm thankful for that. However, in 2014, I got there was a bigger issue for me, and that was, you know, the Jimmy Savile scandal and the fact of the exposure of this abuse. Back in when we set up the CLA in 1999-2000, we were campaigning then over abuse, and we were called, you know, we made it up, fantasies, we were gold diggers and so forth, and there was a big exposure at that time. You might not remember it, but it all came to the North Wales Child Tribunal and so forth. There was so much going on with the government eventually covered up. People like David Cameron were part of the cover, because I was at a select committee which was designed precisely to try and discredit those of us who were campaigning over this question of abuse. And Cameron was part of that posse at the time. And some people from Labour as well, sadly. But they effectively, they quelled that by we were the bad people. We were just making it up. We were all criminals. We were looking for money and so forth. So finally, when the Savile exposure came, it was a chance to go again on this issue. And it was very important to go in again, because ultimately, they are my people. They are the ones who I grew up with. Yeah? They are the ones who suffered in my home. Yeah. The abuse which I faced was in foster placement, not in the home itself. But these kids went through so much, and so it was necessary to fight. And we thought, and all we wanted was an honest playing field, and that's why we got rid of 3 judges, in the way 3 appointed judges to head the panel, because we wanted it to be. He said my flies were in the door. Don't look. I'm not going to do it. So that's why, you know, that issue is brought up in there, because that was still very, very important. What we won, we didn't win much off the government whatsoever, but what we won was society taking notice. What we won was building a movement. What we won was athletes coming out, footballers coming out, and saying what had happened to them as well. We changed the view of society of this to say, yes, it's all right to say this happened. The Me Too movement, in my view, would not have happened without the movement of the care leavers and the movement of the child survivors as well. And again, so that's where we can go from. And yeah, I delight in achieving the impossible. I just wish I'd achieved it. So, thank you very much for listening to me.
described himself as a professional revolutionary, so I think we've witnessed some of that tonight. Thank you very much, Phil. Really heartfelt stuff. Now, I did mention that before we go, we have an opportunity for some questions. There's an awful lot of stuff here, many layers, not just starting at Rosemundy. This is one person's story. But we have in the room other Rosemundy babies, we have a Rosemundy mum, and I wanted to perhaps give the Rosemundy mum, if she has anything to say or ask questions first. This was your preference, I think, Phil. And then open to the Rosemundy babies, and then to the wider group. So, do you have anything to say?
Is there any other Rosemundy?
Oh, are there any other Rosemundy people who want to declare themselves?
I missed it by a dear friend who stopped me going because the social worker was saying I should come here.
Oh, right.
And my son is now 64 and I've got great-grandchildren as well, which
Right.
I wouldn't have had because he would have been born here and gone, but I was
Okay.
able to keep him.
But can I also just say that he also was a mixed race child.
And this was in 1960.
So a lot of things have changed.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
I wished I'd missed it.
Yeah.
Could you explain your the situation?
I brought it.
Can you stand up?
Yeah, I was brought to Rosemundy by my mum, and we walked into the front door, into the matron's office, and the first words were after my mum had gone. Now, madam, your life is going to change right now. And I thought, well, I didn't think it was going to hold a camp, you know what I mean? I knew it was going to be hard, but I didn't think it was going to be like that. And you, like Phil said, you had to, no matter how pregnant you were on your hands and knees on slabs, on slab floors, scrubbing. And if you had a pain, tough, carry on. You were in the laundry, picking up sheets with these wooden tongs out of the copper. If you were in labour, tough. You've got to finish your job. Come meal times, you had to wait on the staff first, then the girls, and then you could have yours. But yours was cold. So that was the start of it. Then it came, had my baby, fair enough. Then it came to the adoption side of it. Like Phil said, they were in prams around this. I'll never forget that tree. It was a big tree there, and the prams were all around it. Parents would come along. Oh, that's a nice baby. That's a nice baby. And you were locked in this room in this dormitory, and you could look out the window and watch them all going on there, and you think to yourself, please don't pick mine. Anyway. Some girls were lucky, they allowed to go home back after it was all happened. But I was one of the few that had to take my baby somewhere else. I was told when it was the new parents had been, I didn't know they'd been, and I was told then, tomorrow you will take your baby and you will take it on the train to Bath, to an office. So I go to the Bath on the train, taking his little bag of all goodies that I'd made for him and all the rest of it. I walked into this office. The floor was bare like this. There was a table just there like this little table here. And this woman came out in her tweeds and her pearls, and she said, name. So I gave her my name. Baby, please. Gave over the baby. So she said, I'll be back in a minute, don't go. So I stayed there. She came out, right, I'll have his bag please. Sign there, and you better hurry up, there's a taxi outside waiting to take you to the station, you've got to go back. I sat on that train and I cried my eyes out all the way back. And it still affects me. And I'm 88, you know what I mean? And people can't say one word, which is a 5-letter word, but to politicians, it's a dirty word. Sorry. And that affects me all the time. I found my son this afternoon because he found me after 50 years. I couldn't find him. He could find me. He had lovely parents. They were head teachers. and they gave him his adoption papers when he was 11. Now, my job was delivering cars all over the country. And I went down to Portsmouth one day to Kennings down there to deliver a car. And there was this little boy up in the field above the garage there. It's like row of houses up the top and the garage at the bottom. And this little boy was up there, and I thought, my Mark, well, he wasn't Mark, he was called Simon, but my Simon was be about that age. And guess what? I found out when he found me, he lived above Kennings, and it was Simon. He was the only little boy that lived up there. And our lives passed and crossed like that for the rest of our lives until he found me. Everywhere he'd been, I'd been. Because my job took me all over the country. You know, and it was weird. And they just changed schools. But you know, Rosemundy was the cruelest place you could ever go. And if you were children there and adopted from there, you just think what your mothers went through. Because it was horrible. Nobody expects a holiday camp in a place like that. But that was wicked. You know, the staff brought their own laundry in to you to do it. You know, everything that they live in, you know, lap of the gods. And you were there on your knees working for them, basically. No, it was terrible. And it still affects me even now. And basically, I lost 2 girls because of this. My girls were born a lot later. I married, and my first husband said, I don't want you to tell my children, not our children, my children, about what you've been through. So then he was pretty abusive, I must admit. So I didn't tell him. I married again, and he was an angel. And he did everything for my girls. Then he died. And I thought, well, I'll tell him now. Because my son had found me and he came to the funeral. Met the eldest daughter, but not the youngest one. And she was fine. She went back home, told her dad that she'd met her half-brother. He went absolutely mental. And he told both the girls again, if you have anything to do with your mother, again, that would be that. You won't be in my will and all this sort of thing. And they were at an impressionable age, you know, and well, one of them now, she's got 2 children, a boy and a girl. I don't know, I've never met them. And the other one has finally, because it's her 50th birthday next month, and she's finally said that if I'd like to send a birthday card up there because I'd asked her friend about it, and she said, if I'd like to send a birthday card to her with my name and address on there and the phone number, she might speak to me. Because that's the way her father taught her. And so it's still affected me. You know,
Well,
I talk about it, I could pull my eyes out.
we won't put you through. Crumbs. Well, goodness me. I've got to draw a raffle in a minute.
I wanted a ticket, but I didn't get one.
Are there any other questions? We've got time for making the most of Phil being here. Has anybody got a question for Phil? I throw it wide open to anyone who has a question. Well, it's been a pretty emotional evening, hasn't it? And if there are no further questions...
Is any of the Rosemundy babies who can speak?
I think some of them might be. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd just say, you know, I was born in Rosemundy House 1956.
56.
Can you speak up for the people at the back?
Should I get up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
The rest of the
Oh, I didn't realise there was so many. So, you know, I was born in 1956 here in Rosemundy, and I was always told by my adopted parents I was adopted. I grew up thinking everybody was adopted. You know, I didn't realise, you know, I go up with best friends and, you know, he'd say, oh, this is my mum and, you know, this, that and the other, and when I go around there, I say, oh, I'm adopted, you know, and I couldn't understand why he wouldn't say I'm adopted as well, you know, and I thought, you know, I believed in the stork and all things like that, you know, but the great thing was I had great adopted parents. They just what everybody wants, and I had a great life. They were loving. My grandparents doted on me, and you know they had natural grandchildren. But even though I was adopted, I was their favourite, and I wasn't their blood, but to them I was, you know. And my adopted parents, you know, if I had one wish, it was that they were my blood parents, and you know, it's not to be. I used to ask my parents occasionally, you know, are you my real dad? Are you my real mum? And they'd say, no, you're adopted. You know, and they wouldn't change the narrative. You know, and I desperately wanted them to be, you know, my parents. But anyway, you know, I thought everybody was adopted. And then later on, you realise there is this difference, and I think, you know, I tried to, you know, trace my parents, and we went on a holiday to London, and we stayed at Crystal Palace in our caravan. My dad drove all the way up to London in the 60s, you know, around the South Circular, which, you know, is no South Circular at all, if anybody knows it. It just goes all through things. And I found, we went to Somerset House because they keep all the family trees there, you know, so I went in Somerset House, and I was climbing up all the different, there's all these volumes of books, and they're all on different shelves and different levels. And, you know, I wrote out all the details for my original name, because I knew what it was. My mum told me, you know, when I was about 15 or something, she said your real name was Philip Warringer, you know, and she said your mother is either Danish or Dutch. And so I went to Somerset House, got the book out, found Philip Warringer in there, and I thought, God, you know, I'm real, you know, this guy really exists, you know. And it was a revelation to me, because up until then it had always been a mystery, and I loved history. I'd done the family tree for my adopted family. It must have been awkward for them and awkward for my grandparents, you know, that I was quizzing them about, you know, their parents and drawing up this family tree. You know, they must have felt a little bit awkward. But anyway, you know, from there, you know, I had this certificate, and I never got anywhere with it because I was too young. I was only about 15 or 16 when I got this. I didn't know how you deal with this. So it was only when I became an adult, you know, I was in the early 20s, I thought, I'm going to solve this mystery. And I just got in my car, drove to the address that was on this birth certificate in 1956, and it was Lanhydrock House. And so I drove down to Lanhydrock House, and I thought, so I parked the car, you know, I was walking up the, you know, when you go towards Lanhydrock House, so you've got the ornamental entrance, and then the house is behind. And what I'd been told by my adopted mum was that my mother was either Dutch or Danish, and she thought my father was the gardener at some place where she was. That's all she knew. So the birth certificate said Lanhydrock House. So of course I was walking up the driveway to the house, looking at the gardener doing the roses. And I was thinking, you know, this guy sort of could be my dad. You know? you know, anyway. But anyway, you know, I walked around the house and I spoke to somebody in the house and they said, you know, sadly it wasn't Lord Robarts, but you know. Anyway, they pointed me to the oldest person on the estate, and it was an old lady, and she lived in the stables. So I went round there, and she was being looked after by a carer. And you know, they said, "Oh, come on in," and she said, "What can I help you with?" You know, she's, you know, like in her 90s, and her dad used to be the chauffeur or something, or the butler to Lord Robarts. And anyway, she said, "Oh, there used to be." I explained that my mother was, you know, probably Dutch, and she said, "Oh, there used to be a Dutch family here. He was they were the gardeners. He was called Van Zollerman." And I thought that tied in with what I thought, you know, the gardener and, you know, and this Dutch family. So she put me in contact with somebody there on the estate that still lives there, at Cutmaddock, I think it was. And I went down to this house, knocked on the door, and I met a lady and she knew my mother. You know, she said, "Yeah, I knew her," you know. And I didn't say about my father was this gardener, but she knew there anyway. She was saying about the Van Zollermans, but they were called Van Zomeren, not Van Zollerman. So, and she was still friendly with them. And she says, "I'm going to see them next week. They're going to be in Basingstoke," you know. So I thought, oh, this is a bit difficult, because I didn't want to say, "Well, that's my dad, probably," you know, that you're going to see. He was a married man. My mother was taken over there. My mother came from the Netherlands, like my father. He came over with his family, so he was a married man. My mother came over to learn English. And, you know,
The rest is history.
yeah, the rest is history. But anyway, I've solved the mystery, so, and I know all the Dutch